So, welcome back to the Writing Advice Q&A. I'm your host, Kirin. The first video of this week was a little bit serious. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's on my channel. I gave a little bit of a pep talk for continuing to write or writing beyond the month-long challenge like NaNoWriMo or Camp NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. You know the dealio. Today, though, we're gonna be tackling a viewer-sent question. As you know, on this channel, I like to grab one of the questions from the comments and usually feature it on a video all by itself. Particularly because this question was something I was talking about on Twitter recently, and I have plenty to say. So let's get started. You already know what we're doing here. You clicked on this video. You can see the title on the screen right now. We're gonna be talking about tips, advice, recommendations, thoughts for anyone out there wanting to create a fantasy language of their own. Now, before I go on anywhere, allow me to remind you, as always, that the following you're about to hear in this particular video is nothing but my advice, my opinion, and what works for me. Don't take it as gospel, instead take it as the ramblings of a silly person who looks a little bit, or rather precisely like this. Okay, you got it? You cool? I'm cool. Okay, I haven't tackled fantasy in a long while, and I have a lot of things to say. So, let's take it from the top. The question that a viewer just like you submitted in the comments down below goes a little bit like this. This is kind of specific, but do you have any tips on creating a language for a fantasy story? I can't seem to pull words out of thin air, and I was wondering if you have any suggestions as to where to find the base for my language. Thanks. Now, generally for videos like this, I can definitely ramble for a long time. I'm doing it right now. Thankfully, though, today I have points. Before I give you the long of it, I'm gonna give you the short of it, okay? Especially because it helps sort things out. There's two things that I need you to keep in mind if you want to make your own language for your fantasy story, okay? Two things right off the start. First off, it's gonna be a lot of work. It's gonna be a lot of work. This is not a thing, like, if you just want to mash words on a keyboard and put some apostrophes here and there, you can do that. It's not gonna be very good, but I assume that if you sent this question and you're watching this video, you'll want to put a little bit more work than that. You want to make something you can actually be proud of. So, it's gonna be a lot of work. Keep that in mind. The second thing, and the thing that makes me incredibly happy to realize, especially because I'm writing and I'm not doing things like a surgeon who has to get them right the first time, you don't have to know everything about your language right off the get-go. You don't have to stop and actually make the language from head to toe? That's a weird way to describe a language, but you don't have to know all of it. You don't have to make it and then start writing the story. You don't have to do any of that. You have time. Remember, as always, that you are writing, and the first draft of your story is merely just that, the first draft. Clay that you will give shape to later on. I have talked about the power of blah before, but if you're writing your story and you want a character to speak a particular language or a language of your own creation, whether it is fantasy or science fiction, to exist in the story, but you don't want to do the work right now, or you don't have all the information right now, feel free to use the power of blah. Write whatever you want to say in brackets and leave it there for future you to revise. This works pretty much for everything when you don't want to stop in the middle of writing, as you shouldn't, and go Google something. The power of blah is always there with you. Blah being whatever you want to fill inside those brackets, okay? Okay, you have time, don't worry about it. I'm gonna talk more in depth on these particular points, but let's take it from the top. What about hard work? As I previously mentioned, the easy way, also feel free to read this as the ineffective / lazy way to do this is just to mash words on a keyboard, put apostrophes there, smash the spacebar a couple of times to break them up, and just call it a day. Just clock out. I would like to inspire you to not do that, for a reason that I will make clear relatively shortly. The other way that fantasy languages usually tend to go in writing is that it's a one-to-one language. It's just English, but with different words. I would also like to encourage you to not do that either. Now, you may be thinking, but Max, why not just translate English into that language? Because isn't that how languages work? You take one and then you change it into the other, right? No, that is not how languages work. And I hate to... This is the part in which I'm going to try to balance me partially ranting and also giving you particular advice, is that how many people who just do one-to-one fantasy languages don't actually speak another language? And I posted about this on Twitter a while back, and the replies that I got were like kind of fantastic. People who speak multiple, even like 3 or 4 languages, going like, yeah, the idea of a one-to-one language is really silly. Now, a little bit of insight. I know it may be hard to believe. No, it's not. But my first language is not English. I was born and raised in Mexico. So my primary language growing up was Spanish. I didn't speak a single thing of English until I was 13 years old. So I need you to understand that I have faced the brute force attempt of learning another language, and I can assure you, English and Spanish are not one-to-one. There are things lost in translation, words that exist in English that don't exist in Spanish, ideas that exist in Spanish that don't exist in English at all. Before even talking about things like accents, let's just tackle the reality that language is really freaking weird. Language is really weird, and I think the idea of just taking English and putting a bunch of apostrophes and shuffling the words around is, one, ineffective, and also is not really authentic. I'm gonna talk more about this in a moment, but here's the dealio. And you may be wondering, okay, but like, maybe it's not as bad to use English as a base, because English is pretty normal. No, it's not. This may seem weird to you, especially if you only speak English. I say to like most of my American viewer base, but like, English is weird. English has, as someone who had to learn it growing up, there are certain things in English that actually don't make sense. It's small things, like English's obsession with whether something is on something or in something. That doesn't exist in Spanish, by the way. That's like I can remember the struggle, like sophomore, junior, senior year in high school, is still having to say things like, it's in the table. No, Max, it's on the table. That's silly. Now, just one more thing. I'm gonna give you one more example. In case you're still thinking like, oh, the in-on thing, I don't get it. If you want to understand just how weird English is, I'm gonna give you one really good example, okay? What does it mean to catch a cold? What is a cold? How is a cold a thing that you can catch as though you went outside with a bucket and a Pokeball? And how is a cold a description of that particular affliction? And also, I'm pretty sure that a textbook translation would demand that you say, I am afflicted with a cold. And yet, the way people say it is, you catch the cold. You caught it. You went outside into the tall grass until the random encounter popped up. Enough Pokemon jokes. But cold as a description for an affliction, and catching it as the way of getting it, as opposed to saying got the cold or was afflicted by the cold, it's to catch the cold. Now, that seems like a rather specific example, but English is weird. English is full of all of these things, especially because English is an amalgamation of like 2-3 different languages. Especially when you can see the division between, like, you can see the point in which French sneaks into some of English, and it's silly. Language is silly. Now, I know I've gone really long on language is silly, but there's one more language is silly point that I have to make. Loan words. Languages steal from other languages. Languages don't exist in a vacuum. Languages affect each other, and my favorite example of languages steal from one another is the idea that in Japan, the word for bread is pan. Now that's funny. How exactly did the Portuguese / Spanish word for bread ended up being the Japanese word for bread? Well, we can discuss that another day. But for now, I want you to realize language is weird. So the idea of just one-to-one translation is not only unauthentic, it's also kind of unrealistic. Okay, that's enough language is weird talk. Let's actually sit down for a moment and discuss the steps towards creating a language of your own. And asterisks on the screen right now, it's gonna be work. Because, and this is gonna be a little bit more work if you don't speak a second language or you have no knowledge of how another language works. Because you're gonna have to relearn the parts of language, syntax, grammar, stuff like that, and understand that even though this is the way we speak, and even though right now you're understanding English within itself has weird rules and weird ways in which language is applied. Nouns, verbs, adverbs, all of those things. You don't have to make everything from scratch, but you do have to realize that you have to put a little bit of thought as to why characters speak a particular way, how this came to be, and the meaning of words. I can almost feel myself going into another words are weird and languages are weird segment, but understand that the words we speak exist because of particular things that happened, and sometimes are words that were just stolen outright, or words that changed over time. I could tell you the origin of the word goodbye, but you can go Google that up after this video's over. What I want you to keep in mind, and my number one tip for doing a language of your own, first off, don't worry too much about it as you're writing the story, just focus on writing the story, putting brackets whatever characters are actually saying or whatever you want to get across from dialogue. And as you are writing, as you are living, as you are doing other stuff, if a thought comes to you, and suddenly in the middle of living, in the middle of washing dishes, you think to yourself, oh, this is the word in this language for butterfly. I just saw it. It just came to me. It's this word. This is what it looks like. What does this word mean in this language? What is the context? And then you can start thinking about applying it in the story. Maybe in the culture of your story, you can have words like being butterfly-hearted, which could mean things like, at once you were hard-hearted, but now, after struggle, after maturing, you've grown wings and become a better person. There. Just slid it under the door. That was actually kind of cool. But this is how languages work, though. Things just happen. Words and concepts get meshed together, and ideas that exist in one don't exist in others. In the Twitter conversation that I had a while back, I was joking about honorifics. What if a particular race has honorifics, but other races don't? How do you address the king of this particular race? What if your character doesn't know? What if your character uses formal syntax in an informal conversation? These are the cool things about language. And even right now, I can assure you that a few of you are thinking, jumping ideas in your head of how this could not only be cool, but it could also be a part of the story. And I think that this makes it way much more authentic and fun and cool than just mashing words on the keyboard and putting apostrophes here and there. This actually had thought behind it, ideas behind it, to the extent where you could even write another book based just on the language itself. It's cool stuff! And one of the things I meant to say from the beginning is that, what sort of language do you want to make? Do you want someone who read your book and was inspired by your book to reach out and say, hey, how did you come up with the language? Do you want to get back to them and say that you just mashed words on a keyboard? Or do you want to say that you built the language over time and that words came to you and you formed the language inspired by the languages of this world, or completely new concepts of your own? I think that would be way cooler. I think I would be more proud of creating that. Okay, this has gone pretty long. I'm gonna revise my feelings in case I forget. If you are considering making a fantasy language, I would like to urge you to look at the mechanics of language itself. Look at other languages. I have some cool resources, by the way. Don't tune out. I have some cool resources for you. Look at elements of other languages. Look at things that don't exist in the language you speak. Break it down. You know, are there nouns in your language? how do verbs work? As you write this story, take notes of everything. Have a separate notebook with just words that come to you, the phonetics of how they sound like, and the way in which words are structured, sentences are structured. I am certain, I am downright certain that once you start doing it, it'll start coming to you. You'll start falling into the motions, and you'll make this language, like languages usually go, one little bit by little bit. And you keep on writing. You keep on telling that story. You keep on working on the language, and once the story is complete, and time has passed, and you're working on the revision, compile the language, and work piece by piece. Fill the brackets, replace with what you meant to say in this language, and move on. Okay, is it a lot of work? Yes, but I think it's gonna be worth it though. I am certain that those of you who are actually interested in doing something like this are already thinking of stuff. The idea of making your own language is really intriguing and also exciting. It may be a thing that keeps you writing just because you want to keep working on this language. But before I leave, before I let you go, there's one thing I want to give you. And it's not on this channel, it's on another channel. There is a man on YouTube called Tom Scott, and he has a playlist called The Linguistics Files, I think. It's on the screen right now and linked in the description down below. Go check out that playlist. It's a playlist of a bunch of videos where he talks about how language is freaking weird. And I think you would really enjoy it. It would give you enough fodder to start realizing that you can break apart language and make it really fun for your particular fantasy race or science fiction race. Okay. Tom Scott's pretty cool. I think he's doing mostly sciencey videos right now because his background is linguistics, but he's doing mostly science videos. His channel is still pretty good. I like it, but those linguistics videos are awesome. But anyhow, okay, this episode went on super freaking long. I know that the idea of making a language of your own can seem incredibly daunting, but you came to this video. And I assume that you asked this question because the prospect of it intrigued you and you really wanted to do it. And I believe, I hold dearly in my heart, that if there's something you want to do, it's worth doing well. Okay? Okay. I hope this helped. As always, anyone out there, if you have advice or thoughts on the question that was answered today, please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. For the time being, as we're rolling into the formal outro, I want to remind you that if you enjoyed this video and would like to make sure that I can continue on making videos like this one for the foreseeable future, please consider checking out my Patreon. You can watch my videos early and get copies of my books and more stuff. But if Patron's not your cup of coffee, how about a cup of tea instead? One-time donation, link in the description down below. And now, in the formal outro, up here, writing advice playlist, over 200 videos. Up here, buttons to subscribe, click on my pixel face. Down here, my Patreon, and over here, my other channel where I play games and I'm a very, very, very silly person with my friend Kitty. Until then, for the time being, I want to thank you for tagging along, thank you for spending a little bit of your day with me, and I hope to see you on the next one.